Welcome to King's Church Las Vegas and the text-driven preaching ministry of Dr. Adam Millett. King's Church exists to make disciples in Las Vegas who make King Jesus known in the world. For more information, go to kingschurchlv.com or download the church app and search for King's Church Las Vegas. Now grab your Bible and listen in as Dr. Millett brings today's message.
All right, turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 40 for a message I have entitled Unwavering. It's been a few weeks since we've been in Genesis. I want to recap a little bit about where we've come from, specifically from chapter 39. Look at verses 1 through 4. And now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian officer named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guards, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor with his master and became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under his authority. Even in slavery, Joseph is providentially led by God to this very specific house and this very specific master, this powerful master. So even in captivity, he is elevated in some way. The second half of verse 6 reads like this: Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after some time his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused. "Look," he said to his master's wife, "with me here my master does not concern himself with anything in his house, and he has put all that he owns under my authority. No one in this house is greater than I am." Even in slavery, Joseph finds himself being looked at favorably by his master, and now favorably by his master's wife. His good gifts are noticed by his master. His good looks are noticed by his master's wife. And when Joseph refuses her advances just one too many times, she begins making up a story about him. She contrives that he is the one making sexual advances towards her. And in verse 17, it reads like this: Then she told him the same story, speaking to her husband, "The Hebrew slave you brought to us came to make a fool of me. But when I screamed for help, he left his garment beside me and ran outside." So Joseph finds himself in prison. He's gone from one pit to another. And in verse 21, "But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. And the warden put all of the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority. He was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful." How many of you have heard stories of those who pushed through a difficult circumstance to have their dreams fulfilled? Anybody heard stories about somebody who's overcome difficulty to have their dreams fulfilled? Think about Thomas Edison, for instance. Thomas Edison didn't get educated past the age of 12. He had run into a number of different issues. He'd been fired twice, and then he goes on to invent the light bulb. Think about Steve Jobs. Dropped out of college. Prospects weren't great. Ends up going on to found this company called Apple. He gets fired for Apple, let go from Apple because he was kind of an eccentric personality, rubbed people the wrong way. He gets fired from Apple, but then Apple falls on hard times and they rehire him. So then he goes on to help Apple become one of the greatest tech manufacturers in the world in his version 2.0 employment with them. Think about a guy named Harlan Sanders. At the age of 65, he takes his first Social Security check for $105 and goes out, begin shopping his secret recipe to local restaurants. He's rejected 1,009 times, but on that 1,010th time, a restaurant finally buys his secret recipe. We know him as Colonel Sanders. We know that restaurant is Kentucky Fried Chicken. How many of those people who had difficult circumstances were able to push through those difficult circumstances and those obstacles to end up realizing their dreams, fulfilling their dreams? But for every dream fulfilled, how many go unfulfilled? How many go rejected? The Wealth Research Group suggests that 98% of people die without fulfilling their dreams, which means for every one Colonel Sanders, there's 49 others who die with dreams unfulfilled. What did you dream of when you were a kid, when you wanted to grow up? When I grow up, I want to be what? Fill in the blank. What was that for you? Could it be a fireman or a policeman? Could it be a professional ice skater or a ballerina? Would you want to be the president of the United States, or perhaps somebody in the military, a professional chef or world famous actor? What was it for you? For me, it was being a truck driver. I thought being a truck driver would be cool. There was this show on TV called BJ and the Bear, and I just thought that was the coolest thing. This guy driving the truck around we had a monkey in his cab, and he had a king-size bed in the back. I thought that was really cool. I wanted to be a truck driver when I grew up. That was one of my dreams. What was it for you? So what happened to that dream? Did you abandon your dream? Did someone tell you you weren't good enough to fulfill that dream? Did you do something to take yourself out of the running for that dream? Did you give up on your dream? Why? When you look back on that missed opportunity, what comes to mind? Now take all of those thoughts and those emotions about that dream possibly unfulfilled and put yourself in Joseph's shoes. Joseph had a dream. In fact, he had two dreams. And both of them saw him as the emerging and dominant figure in his house. A towering figure whom others were going to bow down to. But instead of towering over his family, he's now in prison. Quite the opposite of his dream. The question to be answered, the question this text answered, was whether or not Joseph would give up on his dream. The dream that he had, that he told his brothers about, that he told his father about, would he give up on that dream because he found himself in prison in these particular circumstances? Would he abandon his dream? He'd kept himself sexually pure, and what he earned for it was a trip to prison. Would he stick to his dreams even in prison? Would he retain his faith in God even in prison? The answer to those questions is found here in chapter 40. Read with me beginning verse 1. After this, the king of Egypt's cupbearer and baker offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guards in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guards assigned Joseph to them as their personal attendant, and they were in custody for some time. In this second pit, he's now placed in service of these two who got on Pharaoh's bad side. The cupbearer and the baker, both were officers in the king's court. They were men of great rank and importance, and their access to the king demanded both his confidence and their confidentiality. They were most surely nobles in their own right, either princes or some regard. They were close to the king in some way, and yet they find themselves on the bad side of the king. He's angered against them. Some have suggested they might have been involved in a plot to assassinate him, poisoning the wine or poisoning the bread or some things that are offered. Some suggest that they were thrown into prison to give Pharaoh enough time to discern who was the culprit. We're not sure what they did to offend the king of Egypt, but he was angry enough to throw them in jail. Maybe not on a permanent basis, but maybe just long enough for him to figure out who was the one in the wrong. The baker was in charge of everything related to providing for and preparing the meat for the royal table. When it came to the kitchen, he was in charge. So the cupbearer was more than just someone who simply passed the king his cup. He was the overseer of the royal vineyards and the cellars. He probably had hundreds of people in his charge and under his care, including the baker. In a modern day equivalent, this guy would have been the butler. If you're a Downton Abbey fan, he would have been Mr. Carson. If you watch Batman, he would have been Alfred. Not simply the doorman, but caretaker of the whole estate. And because they were officers in the king's court, they didn't just go to any jail. They went to jail in the captain of the prison, the captain of the guards, which in this case means Potiphar's house, the house where Joseph was in custody. And yet, even as prisoners in jail, they were still officials in Pharaoh's court, and they still have the luxury of having a servant even while they're in captivity. And in this case, it was Joseph, which for Joseph would have been a victory. It would have given him an opportunity to rub shoulders with these VIP inmates and to use his gifts. It was a sign of his master's favor. The same master, this being Potiphar, the same master who ordered him to prison, is now looking in his direction to take care of these VIP inmates, which is a sign on some level that Potiphar probably knew his wife had falsely accused Joseph. He just couldn't say so out loud. Now he's put Joseph in charge of these VIP inmates. God was moving even if Joseph couldn't see it. But even if he couldn't see it, Joseph was still patiently and obediently waiting. The story continues in verse 5. The king of Egypt's cupbearer and baker who were confined in the prison each had a dream. Both had a dream on the same night, and each dream had its own meaning. And when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they looked distraught. And so he asked Pharaoh's officers who were in custody with him in the master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We had dreams," they said to him, "but there is no one to interpret them." And then Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The fact that Joseph is still convinced of his ability to offer interpretations on behalf of God means that he had not given up on his dreams. It answers our question for today. Joseph hadn't lost his faith. He hadn't given up. He hadn't given up on God. He hadn't given up on himself. He hadn't given up on the dreams that he had back when he was still living in his father's house. The two officers in this story had dreams they couldn't interpret. Something was stirring in their soul, but it was unresolved. You see, in Pharaoh's court, they would have had some kind of magicians there who would have offered interpretations of their dreams, but they're down in prison and they have no access to those interpretations. Their distress was from not being able to make heads or tails of their dreams. They were cut off from the people who would have normally given them an answer to their dreams. In ancient thinking, dreams were a prime revelation of divine revelations. This isn't lost on Joseph or on his officials. He recognizes the dreams have divine origin, but he rejects that there is a professional magician who can offer the interpretations. He says, don't interpretations belong to God? God, who gave the revelation, also gives the interpretation. Interpreting dreams is not just the privilege of humans, but the domain of God. For the officers here, the dreams represent distress. For Joseph, they represent an opportunity to lead. And so he says, tell me your dreams. And in verse 9, the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. In my dream, there was a vine in front of me. On the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms came out and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. This is its interpretation, Joseph said to him. The 3 branches are 3 days. In just 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand the way that you used to when you were his cupbearer. But when it all goes well for you, remember that I was with you. Please show kindness to me by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. For I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should put me in this dungeon. And when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was positive, he said to Joseph, I also have had a dream. 3 baskets of white bread were on my head. In the top basket were all sorts of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. This is its interpretation, Joseph replied. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In just 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from off of you and hang you on a tree. Then the birds will eat the flesh from your body. For the first time in this story, Joseph protests his innocence. He hasn't to this point said anything about any of his captivities, but for now he's suggesting that his current state is an injustice to him. He says, I haven't done anything to rate the treatment that I've gotten, to rate the imprisonment that I currently find myself in. It speaks of the words penned by the psalmist in Psalm 44. Why? Wake up, Lord. Why are you sleeping? Get up. Don't reject us forever. Why do you hide and forget our affliction and oppression? For we have sunk down to the dust and our bodies cling to the ground. Rise up, help us, redeem us because of your faithful love. There's this sense that Joseph wants to get out from underneath the captivity that he finds himself in, the injustice that he finds himself in. He was unjustly suffering without cause. He hadn't done anything. God was surely testing him. In the first dream, Joseph provides a favorable interpretation, says that the cupbearer is going to be restored to his position in 3 days. And when he asks the cupbearer to remember him, remember his kindness after he gets out. Remember the injustice of his incarceration after he gets out. But unlike with the previous interpretation, Joseph doesn't ask the baker to remember him. Why? Because he's going to be dead in 3 days. The poor baker's dream wasn't quite like the cupbearer's. Just because one interpretation was favorable didn't mean the other was going to be favorable. 3 days the cupbearer would be restored. In 3 days the baker would be executed. Or at least that's the interpretation of Joseph. The prophetic words of Joseph come to life here in the final verses of this chapter. Look with me in verse 20. And on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a feast for all of his servants. He elevated the chief cupbearer and the chief baker among his servants. And Pharaoh restored the chief cupbearer to his position as cupbearer. And he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But Pharaoh hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had explained to them. And when the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, he forgot him. Joseph did his part in providing the interpretation. The cupbearer, at least in this moment, hasn't done his part to remember Joseph. He's forgotten Joseph and the kindness that Joseph showed to him. But at least Joseph has it better off than the baker does, right? Pharaoh hanged him, or at least as some translations suggest, he actually impaled him and the birds came to eat the flesh off of him like a kebab. The dreams in both of these recounts here from the baker and the cupbearer, they're like polar opposites. They're extremes. Extremes like life or death, success or failure, bounty or famine, favor or slavery. One of them was elevated. One of them was eliminated, and one still finds themselves in prison. All under the sovereign authority of God. Genuine faith endures. That is the main idea this morning. Genuine faith endures. It is unwavering. Had Joseph given up on his dreams, he would have never offered to interpret theirs. Let me say that again. If he had given up on his dreams, he would have never offered to interpret theirs. If he thought his interpretation of his own dreams was faulty, he would have never offered to interpret theirs. He hadn't given up on his dreams. His faith wasn't in the dreams themselves. His faith was in the person who gave him those dreams, in God himself. But where is God in the story? He's noticeably absent. It's like the story of Ruth, the story of Esther. He's not there on the pages. Where is God in this story? Where is God in your story? Have you ever asked that? It comes to your career. I don't care if you're in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s. You ever asked yourself, why am I not farther along? Maybe I thought I was going to be a little bit farther along, some more promotions, more advancement. I thought by the time I would get to 40, I would be in this position, whatever that is. What about for your marriage? In your singleness, you thought maybe I should be married by this point in my life. It hasn't worked out for me. I don't know why that is. Where is God? Or infertility. By this point in my life, I expected to be a mom. I expected to be a dad. Or God has blessed you with fertility. I can't just go out like I used to. There's money I used to have that I don't have anymore. I'm spending it on formula, diapers. Where's God? Finances. Thought I'd have more money in the bank. Thought I'd have more saved up for retirement. Where is God? We can ask, where is God in our career, in our marriage, in our singleness, in our infertility, in our fertility, in our finances? Where is God? Do you feel like your prayers are hitting the ceiling? Do you feel like God stopped listening? Do you feel like He stopped speaking to you? Like God has gone AWOL? Like He's absent without leave? Where are you, God? But as Kuravilla says about this story, the literary absence of God does not mean the literal absence of God. God is working. He has not left you. He is not some divine watchmaker who wound up the universe and then walked away. He's not some divine watchmaker who wound up your universe and then walked away. God is still with you. He is present. He is working in the unseen. He is working in the unnoticed. He is working in the margins even when you can't see Him. He is working out his sovereign plan through the faithfulness of his servants. He is working all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purposes. God is working. And part of being faithful servants is recognizing when something is God's job and when it's our job. And when it's God's job, we just need to get out of the way. We need to get out of God's lane. We need to stay in our lane and let God be God and let God do his thing. Part of getting out of his way is recognizing those things that don't fall to us. The first of which is interpretations. Interpretations belong to God. Dreams are an important part of the Joseph story. Biologically, dreams originate during periods of sleep in which brain activity is high. Some believe we have dreams as a way to process certain memories, in short, to move them from short-term storage to long-term storage. Some believe we have dreams as a way to process difficult emotions. Sometimes our mind can go some places with emotions in our unconscious state that we refuse to in our conscious state. Some believe that dreams are just a way to process different biological brain signals, random brain signals, a way to interpret those things. Now, all of those explanations of dreams are plausible, possible. And since God is the author and creator of life, dreaming is a God-given function. Dreaming is something God designed, but not all dreams are from God. Not all dreams are divinely given. The prophet Jeremiah says this in chapter 23, "Behold, I am against those prophesying lying dreams, declares the Lord, and those who tell them and lead my people astray by their lies and their recklessness, when I did not send them or charge them. So they do not profit this people at all, declares the Lord." Some people will leverage the notion of dreams to serve their own agendas. They'll tell you, I had a dream from God, but it's not actually God's dream. It's just to serve their agenda. God didn't send them. So beware, not all who dreams the Lord dreams. And beware, not all who convey their dreams convey messages from the Lord. The preacher in Ecclesiastes says this, "For when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity. But God is the one you must fear." Dreaming is a God-given function, but not all dreams are God-given. But while not all are God-given, some are. Think about this. The dream given to Abimelech in Genesis chapter 20, that was God-given. The dream given to Daniel regarding the end times, that was God-given. The dream given to Joseph, not this Joseph, but Joseph in the New Testament, they were God-given. He told Joseph, take Mary as your wife. He told Joseph, get out of here and go to Egypt. He told Joseph, Herod's now dead. You can return from Egypt. All of those dreams were God-given. And just like all of the dreams in the New Testament Joseph story, all of the dreams in the Old Testament Joseph story are God-given. Pairs of dreams specifically. 2 pairs for Joseph in chapter 37, 2 here in chapter 40, 2 given to Pharaoh in the next chapter, chapter 41. Joseph's dreams predicted their destiny, and guess what? They predicted his. Matthew Henry says this about Joseph's dreams: God has immediate access to the spirits of men, which he can make serviceable to his own purposes whenever he pleases, quite beyond the intention of those concerned. To him, all hearts are open, and anciently he spoke not only to his own people, but to others in dreams. Some dreams are most definitely from God. God can and has used the medium of dreams to reveal his plans and his desires. So whether dreams come from someone with an agenda, or dreams come from unresolved emotions or memories, or dreams come from the Lord himself, one thing this passage makes clear: interpretations belong to God. Interpreting interpersonal communications is hard. We watch a Seinfeld episode, right? And there's this sense of how was the question asked and what word was stressed. Every time we have an interpersonal communication with somebody, it matters how they said what they said. To whom it was said, how they said it, when it was said, where it was said, with what tone it was said, what cadence it said. This is why sometimes text messages get us into trouble, because we don't know what the other person's facial expression looked like when they wrote that text message, right? Interpersonal communications are hard. Figuring out, interpreting what other people meant by how they said what they said, that's hard. Interpretation, the true meaning of something, is God's alone. We take stabs at it. We offer possibilities, but true understanding, true interpretation is God's alone. That's a point this text meant. A point that's aimed at silencing both the ancient and the modern mystics. People who read palms, people who read tea leaves, people who do Ouija boards, people who look at horoscopes, those who fancy themselves as modern mystics. The reason these officials couldn't offer interpretations to the dreams is because God hadn't given them the answers. Without insight, they were in the dark, which, if we are honest, is true of all divine revelation. We can interpret God's existence. We can know that there is a higher power based upon the things that God has made, upon his general revelation. But we can't offer an interpretation on that general revelation apart from special revelation. Apart from God revealing himself in the scriptures, we can't truly know why the world is the way that it is. And we can't truly know the scriptures apart of God interpreting those to our heart by his Holy Spirit. Without the Spirit of God enlightening someone's mind and heart, the revelation of God is difficult to understand and impossible to comprehend. That's why so many people struggle to make heads or tails of what's going on here in the Bible, because they don't possess the Spirit of God. They're literally blind. And so if that's you, let me say with the Apostle Paul, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, so that you may know what is the hope of his calling and what is the wealth of his glorious inheritance in the saints. Pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened. God has spoken, sometimes in dreams, most definitely in his word, and interpretations belong to God. Secondly, faithfulness as a Christian means acknowledging that timelines belong to God. Verse 23, the cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. That's human nature. Human nature to forget. Our problem solved. What's on Netflix tonight? We can just kind of move on. Our problem's fixed. How prone are we to forget those people who walked through that difficult time with us now that our problem's solved? To forget our companions in adversity, just like the butler forgot Joseph. But God had another plan in mind. He had another plan of salvation for Joseph. He was going to make good on his dreams, but chapter 40 wasn't the right time. It's going to take another chapter. It's going to take 2 more years. Many of us have gotten into the business telling God how it's going to be or dictating when it's going to be. Even if God has called us to a work, we begin to expect him to work on our timeline. God, you should already have this figured out by now. God, I should already be in this place by now. God, this problem should already be solved by now. Well, God, why am I still here? We're trying to tell God when it's going to be on our timeline. But God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. 1,000 years in our timeline is like one day with him. Think about COVID. What made COVID so difficult was the fact that you didn't know in the early part of 2020 when it was going to end. It was just this open-ended proposition, and we were going to shelter in place indefinitely. Every day was hard because you didn't know when it was going to end. If somebody could have told you, hey, in March of 2020, this is going to start, but in October of 2020, it's going to be over, you could pace yourself. But the fact that you didn't know when it was going to come to an end made every day daunting. The same is true with everything that you've got going on. If you're in a state of poverty and you don't know where the finish line is, it is daunting. If you're in a state of singleness and you don't know when the finish line is, it is daunting. If somebody could tell yourself right now in your single state that 8 months from now you were going to meet the love of your life and everything was going to change, you would make the most of these 8 months. But the fact that you can't see when that solution is going to come makes it hard. Same thing with illness. You don't know when that solution is going to come, if it's ever going to come, and every day is hard. Part of the reason these difficult times in your life seem so long is because you can't see the end. But God can. God can. God knows when it starts. He knows when it ends. You're getting all worked up about something. God already knows the solution. He knows how the story is written. He knows when it comes to an end. God can. He can see that you are right where you are supposed to be. God's never late. He's never too early. He's always on time. And his answers will always be above and beyond all that you could ask or think. Number 3, outcomes belong to God. Outcomes belong to God. Gambling in the U.S., sports betting specifically, is at an all-time high. Once it was generally frowned upon, has now become big business. Last year in the U.S. alone, over $147.9 billion was wagered on legal sports gambling. That's up $13 billion from the year before. Gamblers try and do several things to give them a better chance to win, but even the most successful bettors only win at about a 60% rate. In fact, most lose. Those skyscraper hotels downtown weren't built with winners. They were built with losers. Now, how much do you think that those guys who stake a bet on something would stake if they knew the outcome to a sporting event? They would stake everything they had and everything you had if they knew the outcome. So why waste your time and money on something that has just a 60% success rate? Bet on God. He's right 100% of the time. Outcomes belong to God. Nothing he purposes will fail to happen. Nothing he promises will come untrue. The only one who knows the outcome before it happens is God. Outcomes belong to God. Joseph had to have been encouraged by the outcomes in this chapter. Not because he wanted the baker to die, but because those outcomes proved that his interpretations were in fact God's interpretations. That he still had it. That God was still with him. Even though he had awaited 11 years, he could be sure that God was still with him because the thing that he interpreted in the chapter came true in verses 21 through 23. Others may have forgotten him. God hadn't. Outcomes belong to God. When it comes to the will of God, when I think about outcomes belonging to God, I'm speaking to God's revealed will, God's decreed will. God's revealed will, i.e. his word is perfect, 2 Timothy 3:16. It's complete, Revelation 22:18. Our interjection will not change God's revealed will. God's decreed will, the outcome he has predetermined, will come to pass. Job 42:2 says, I know that you can do anything and that no plan of yours can be thwarted. Whatever end state God intends will be achieved. So the question you might be asking is, if interpretations belong to God, and timelines belong to God, and outcomes belong to God, what role do I have? God seems to have it all worked out. What's his desire for me? Faithfulness. Faithfulness. Faithfulness belongs to you. Interpretations belong to God. Timelines belong to God. Outcome belongs to God. Faithfulness is your responsibility. We can either choose to participate in God's plan towards his outcomes, or God will find somebody else. But his outcomes will be achieved. Your response is not to dictate the outcome or tell God when it needs to happen. Your response is to be faithful. Because that's what Joseph did. There's a leadership axiom that says never waste a good crisis. Many people attribute that to Winston Churchill. Never waste a good crisis, which means that moments of opportunity, moments of crisis represent opportunities. You may see it as a crisis, but it actually represents an opportunity. In the context of an organization, an opportunity to innovate and change, to focus on priorities, to learn and to grow, to address long-standing problems that you just haven't dealt with, but now you have a crisis that's forcing you to deal with it and to measure your resilience. Joseph didn't waste a crisis. He remained faithful through it. The man who would one day be leader over a nation needed to walk through this season of crisis so that he would be a better leader on the outside of this. Don't waste a crisis. Whatever God is allowing you to walk through right now, don't miss the lesson he's trying to teach you. Don't shirk off your obligations to obey God, even in the middle of the hard time. Don't abandon the things that you know to be true just because life got hard all of a sudden. Faithfulness is your responsibility. Despite all of the conversations that we have about God's providence and God's sovereignty, the Bible never absolves the believer of obedience. You're expected to love the Lord your God with all that you are, including your actions in the middle of a crisis. Despite all of the difficulties Joseph faced, we never see Joseph doing anything less than his absolute best. He's always doing his best, no matter what, even down in the prison. Whether in service of his father, or Potiphar, or Pharaoh's officers, Joseph gives 100% all the time. Never give God less than your best. In your service, in your obedience, in your faithfulness, people will forget you. But remember, God doesn't. He remembers. He is with you. Your situation is not lost on Him. Why? Because He is right there with you. Whatever you are encountering, listen to me, whatever you are encountering today has passed through the hands of God before it got to you. God knows. He is not unaware. Don't miss your opportunity to demonstrate faith even in your circumstances. Joseph was unjustly suffering. He was suffering without cause. Surely God was testing him. This story illustrates the fact that God often works in people's lives in reverse sort of ways. The pattern here is that a bad thing happens, which God uses for good. Maybe that's the pattern in your life. Bad things happen, which God uses for good. Joseph's circumstances could not destroy his faith. His moments of private faith in prison revealed he is now ready for bigger and larger responsibilities. God tests people's faith before He entrusts them with greater responsibilities. One commentator says this: those who are convinced that God desires to use them in greater capacities will demonstrate unwavering faith in the midst of discouraging situations. Genuine faith endures. Joseph may have been the central figure in this story, but he is not the central figure in the story. When we look at Joseph, we see someone who in some small way points us to the perfection that we see in Jesus. If anyone suffered unjustly, it was Jesus. If anyone suffered without cause, it was Jesus. 1 Peter 2 says this: for you were called to this, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in His steps. He did not commit sin, and no deceit was found in His mouth. When He was insulted, He did not insult in return. When He suffered, He did not threaten, but He entrusted Himself to the one who judges justly. He Himself bore our sins in His body on a tree, so that having died to sins, we might live for righteousness. By His wounds you have been healed. For we are like sheep going astray, but now you have been returned to the shepherd and the chief overseers of your souls. If Christ had not gone to the cross and suffered in our place, there would be no hope for us. Not even a glimmer of hope. Instead, there would be this chasm between ourselves and God that we could never jump over. But because Christ did go to the cross, the just for the unjust, the sinless for the sinner, and because Christ did rise from the grave, overcoming the sting of death, we have a great hope. We have a living hope. We have an eternal hope. Praise Christ Jesus.